Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Taquina Boston.
We're your hosts and real-life sisters who binge on historical drama.
We'll talk about films, fictional adaptations, and dramatic series as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
So fill your teacup or mug with your favorite sip as we explore what's fact, what's fiction, and the so what on historical drama with the Boston Sisters. I'm Michonne Boston.
And I'm Taquina Boston. Welcome to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters. Listen to past episodes and sign up for our newsletter on our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters to stay up to date on new episodes and bonus content. In this episode, we talk with BEN VANSTONE, writer and showrunner for All Creatures Great and Small, about the making of the series currently in its third season on the PBS drama series Masterpiece. BEN's other TV credits include the adaptation of Laurie Lee's novel Cider for Rosie for the BBC, The Borrowers for NBC and the BBC, The Last Kingdom for BBC Two and Netflix, BBC's Merlin, which was also broadcast in the United States on NBC, and Ben was a co-executive producer on The English Game for Netflix. Ben is currently showrunning the series adaptation of Amor Tolls' A Gentleman in Moscow for Paramount Plus Showtime, starring Ewan McGregor, which is in production.
All Creatures Great and Small is the recent adaptation of the books written by veterinarian James Alfred Wight, who wrote under the pen name James Herriot, about a trio of veterinarian surgeons in the Yorkshire Dales in the late 1930s. The series features Nicholas Ralph as James Herriot, Samuel West as Siegfried Farnon, Anna Madeley as Mrs. Hall, Callum Woodhouse as Tristan Farnon, and Rachel Shenton as Helen Alderson. Season 3 begins in spring 1939. James and Helen are married, and James is now a partner with Siegfried in the veterinary practice. James decides to expand the practice by participating in the Ministry of Agriculture's program to test cattle for tuberculosis. This puts pressure on James from the ministry and the local farmers. Meanwhile, war with Germany looms on the horizon, bringing with it uncertainty about the future for everyone. The shadow of impending war brings back memories for Siegfried and Mrs. Hall of how the First Great War shattered lives. For another generation, there are conflicts of conscience in how to answer the call to protect family, home, and country against growing fascism from abroad. Welcome, Ben, to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters.
Hi, lovely to meet you both.
So we read you grew up in the Berkshire, and in the United States, we would probably say Berkshire, the countryside. Yeah, Berkshire.
Yeah.
How did growing up there help you in creating the series All Creatures Great and Small?
Well, I think that in many ways, I grew up in the country and was a country boy at heart who ended up in the city. So in some ways, it's sort of the inverse journey to what James has, where he sort of grows up in the city and moves to the country. So I was lucky enough to have been around a lot of animals, particularly horses. Where I grew up, there were a lot of racehorses. It was a racehorsing village. So there's some knowledge from that which I took into it. But I didn't spend a great deal of time with farm animals, even though I was in the country. So yeah, to have a sense of the sort of the way the country works, I suppose, and the sorts of characters that might be around. But not many stories wormed their way in from my Berkshire days. It's mainly James Herriot's sort of upbringing that features.
What changes did you make in adapting James Herriot's books to make it more relatable to audiences today?
Well, I think that the books themselves are a series of vignettes and sort of anecdotes that are very much told from James Herriot's point of view. So the sort of while you get sort of a really rich tapestry of the Yorkshire Dales, and you come to meet all these extraordinary characters, be them farmers or villagers who bring their animals in, or just people he sees around Darrowby, you don't always get a fully fleshed out sense of all the characters' inner lives. And so when I sort of first came to pitch the show, which was, I don't know, that's 7 years ago now, something like that. It's a long time. We very much wanted to flesh out all those characters, particularly the female characters, who, just because of the novel's very much about James Herriot's life, they don't feature massively, but they're all, they're always there. You know that sort of Mrs. Hall was always in the house, and it was always a starting point for me to sort of slightly expand that view. So instead of it just being about James Herriot, it's sort of about all those other characters that you populate the show with and give an inner life to as well. So yeah, it was always about trying to find, sort of build that world out from everything that Alf Wight, James Herriot wrote in the first place.
We've been really interested in some of the, I don't want to say they're lesser characters, but they aren't like the core characters,
Yeah,
specifically the Chapman families and the Pandhi families.
yeah,
Um, and Anne Chapman, who's played by Cleo Sylvester, was introduced in the first season.
yeah,
And she's a Black woman who married a Yorkshire man, a white Yorkshire man named Bert, played by David Hill. And they have a biracial son, Tom, played by Lemon Touré. Um, so the Chapmans are in the original James Herriot books. Tell us a little bit about how you developed their story in your adaptation for All Creatures Great and Small.
yeah. Well, I kind of, we're sort of very open minded about um, who stories are for. Well, for me, stories are for everyone, regardless of race, creed, gender, you know, sexuality, and we wanted to make sure we try to be as open and as inclusive as possible, but at the same time wanted to sort of understand what the history was of people of color, or mixed race, or of Indian heritage. And we started doing some research, and actually we came across Chloe as an actor first, who we really loved and liked, and then found out she had this amazing story about her mum, who grew up sort of about 20 miles away from where we were filming at the time. And she was sort of brought up there in a, I think it was an orphanage that she grew up. It's a long time ago since I researched it or sort of read Cleo's story. And I think it was in an orphanage, and she lived up in the Dales during her 20s before, I think, moving down to London. But it sort of gave me this idea that there's someone up there who would have had a job, would have been in the community, and why not use Cleo's sort of real story to ground her character? And so we used, and Cleo was very kind to sort of allow us to do that, and we sort of built out the family from there, because then it sort of struck us that it's actually Tom's actually her grandson rather than son, because it
Ah,
thought, yeah, they've had
Oh,
children, so where have these children gone? Um,
yeah.
I can just hear my own children are thundering through the house, so they might burst in. I apologise for that. So we were sort of, well, if they've had children, where are they? They're not. This is not a time where people sort of left where they grew up. They sort of very much stayed close to home and found their life there. It wasn't like now, where it seems that everyone sort of grows up and leaves and sort of deserts the town they grew up in. So we built out the story from that one character, and yeah, Tom features in series 3. I'm just trying to think again which episode you're up to. Yes, you might not have seen him yet on TV, but I think he definitely features in series 3. And yeah, maybe looking forwards, he may feature again, but we like to keep that under our hats a little bit for season 4, and looking forwards. But it's all about finding that community, and making it real and inclusive and diverse. With sort of Pandhi, it was this incredible thing where we looked back at an old photo from, I think it was Glasgow Veterinary College, in the early 1920s. It was a photo of all the graduates that year, and they were so. And this is sort of tied up with Britain's not so glorious sort of imperial past, but there were a lot of people from all over the then British Empire who were coming to Great Britain to be educated. And so there was a sort of a really wide range of different nationalities and races who were training to be vets. And we kind of thought, well, some of them would have stayed. What would have happened if you came as a young man and then fell in love and decided to stay then? And so it's from those sort of real life sources that we then built out our characters' stories.
Yeah, and we're finding in our historical drama community, there's a real hunger and excitement for those kinds of stories, the ones that feel untold, but have very
Yeah,
real, roots. Yeah.
absolutely. I think it's very easy for people to think they know history as well and sort of dismiss, oh, this is what it was like, and there were no black people or there were no Indian people. And actually, when you start to sort of look at the true history, it's not at all like what people expect, um, and think they know.
Yeah, there's history and then there's mythology. And
Yeah,
history is always much more complex.
absolutely.
So, will there be a season 4? And might we see more of these characters if there is a season 4?
So season four's on the way. Yeah, it is shooting. Starts shooting in.
Yay!
Um, hope that's not a spoiler. That's not been released. But yeah, season four is on its way, and it shoots in about. I'm looking at my calendar. 7 weeks' time. It starts.
Soon.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
soon. So that's advanced, and yeah, we'll see what
Well,
the story is there.
well, speaking of going into production, let's talk about the location. Where is All Creatures Great and Small filmed, especially on location? And what is your relationship with the local community there?
Yeah, I mean, but my personal relationship is very fleeting because I'm sort of in and out, and the crew and cast who are up there a lot, they see a lot more of it. I think that it's filmed in Yorkshire, not far from Harrogate, which is this beautiful little town, and we have a base where the interior of Scaledale House is built. We have a set which is in a studio. I say studio. It is a old mill.
Soundstage? Oh,
It's an old mill that's been sort of turned into our studio, and that's where the house is built, and that it stays there all the time. And then we have just a series of all the farms around there. We go and visit the real places. We have wonderful location managers who find the farms and the people to let us use them. And yeah, so it's all filmed out in Yorkshire Dales.
that's great because it's nice to be there instead of having a stand in for the
Yeah,
Yorkshire Dales.
yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's no way. I mean, it's such a treasured, iconic, wonderful piece of literature anyway. If we took it out of Yorkshire, I think that we would not have lasted very long. I think, yeah, that wouldn't have gone down well. The locals in generally are just are wonderful and welcoming and are keen for us to do their county justice.
Are they excited to see places that they recognize in the series?
I don't know. I don't know. I've not spoken to people. I've only sort of interacted with people more who are watching it being filmed,
Yeah.
and they're always sort of keen for us not to mess it up because it's such a uh, he is such a sort of treasured, beloved author of the county. He's probably one of their biggest exports, I would say.
Yeah. A lot of filming of locations in the States are often done in Canada these days. So to
Right.
see something in the place that it actually happened or set, it's pretty exciting.
Yeah. How do you guys feel about that? What's the Canada US? Is that
We,
The story for me is the
yeah,
thing.
yeah?
yeah.
It depends. Sometimes when they have stand-ins for like Washington, D.C., for example, the subway scene, there was a subway in Georgetown where there isn't a subway in
Oh,
Georgetown.
really?
Right.
No,
Yeah.
that's a
Stuff
bit
like
close.
that can be annoying.
When you're a local, that's when it gets
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
gets annoying. So there's something about these times that I think made the agrarian and historical setting of all creatures, great and small, contribute to its popularity
Yeah.
in the past couple of years. So somehow the setting must operate as both character and driver of the series. As a writer, how do you how do you incorporate this setting, this Yorkshire Dales, into your stories, and how is it inspiring you?
I mean, it's when we first sort of thought about doing this show, I went up and stomped around and spent some time there, and it's sort of it's such a wild but beautiful place. It's a bit of a paradox. It's sort of, it can be the most brutal place to go when the wind gets up and it rains or snows, but at the same time it can be absolutely stunning as well. And I think the setting itself, I mean, it's just what I think is that it's a much simpler time when community is more important, and there's not much, you can't really go anywhere else. There's no sort of supermarket bringing in food from other countries or anything like that. It's you rely on the people around you, and it's a lot more inward looking than our lives are now. And I wonder if that's part of the appeal, that people sort of appreciate a world that is slightly smaller, and where people do know each other and do rely upon one each other and have that sense of community that maybe we don't so much anymore.
And yet we seem to be craving it a lot more, I think, particularly coming out of the isolation
Yeah,
period that we had recently.
yeah,
So
exactly.
World War II is like this shadow hanging over the community. And, Michonne and I grew up with relatives who served in that war, who lived through that war. We've heard those stories so much, sometimes we feel like we've lived through them. But the way those times were depicted in the Hollywood movies we saw was there was heroism and everybody knew that they were on board and, fighting for the free world. But we see the conflicts that people are experiencing in All Creatures Great and Small. And I can really appreciate that even though I know the history, I'm like with the characters kind of wondering, is it really going to happen? Kind of feeling the way that
Yeah,
they're feeling it. So could you say a little bit about how the way that you're presenting that time may have be different, considering how, the time we're in, from the way it's been depicted in television and movies from the past, in the 20th century.
yeah, I mean, I think that we were really careful to make sure that we were with our characters and didn't take the knowledge that we had of what happened and give it to them. It was until war broke out, there was always hope that it wouldn't, and it would be avoided because everyone was terrified of it. Well, not every, I imagine, yeah. Well, I can't say everyone because there might be people that weren't, but um, the majority of people didn't want it to happen, and it was something that was coming towards them, which they didn't have the same certainty that we have now, and we were just really careful to make sure our characters were being themselves and acting with the knowledge they have. And for Siegfried and Mrs. Hall and what they've been through in World War I, they have a sort of and that's just so close in their sort of lived history. It's only sort of 20 years previously, which I know 2 decades seems an awful lot, but when you're 40s and 50s, it's sort of time shrinks. It doesn't seem that long ago for
Yeah.
them. So they carry with them this fear of the damage that it did. So they have a greater awareness than perhaps James and Tristan do, particularly of what could happen and what could come down the road. But we were, yeah, just very keen to make sure that we um, didn't get ahead of ourselves and didn't get ahead of what people knew and felt at the time. Um, you know, but yeah, it war comes, We all know that as the audience, but I thought it was really interesting to interrogate those characters without that certainty.
Yeah, and they all have different um, perspectives on whether or not it will happen. As you said, there are those who hope it won't. There are those who are sure it will, and there are those who are like, "Oh, it's not going to happen,"
Yeah,
which makes for a real tension in the
Yeah,
story.
I definitely feel their anxiety.
yeah,
Yeah,
and it sort of
yeah,
really ratchets up through the series, where it's sort of, and that was always our intention, and it just sort of bubbles under the surface without really
hmm,
knowing it. It starts to sort of seep into everything in everybody's lives. Not to say that the
yeah,
series gets, too sort of um, downbeat. So don't worry about that. It's still our show, and still warm and funny, hopefully, and joyful. But there is this serious event on the horizon that we know is coming.
And
yeah.
we all know life is not all a drag.
No,
Right, right.
exactly.
We take the bitter with the sweet for sure. And then this is a little spoiler alert for those who are listening, but I was also very moved by the story with the women who are deaf volunteers who Mrs. Hall encounters at the train station. Um,
Hmm.
so we're curious about that that storyline and also the actresses who are in that scene or in that part of
Yeah.
the
So
series.
yeah, there was I think it was called the Auxiliary Women's Service, which was created during this period, which women could volunteer for to help with um, the war effort and the possibility of the coming war. And they, deaf people volunteered, and we wanted to represent people from who were deaf as well. It didn't sort of matter to us, sort of, if we just kind of wanted to have a very broad sort of sense of everyone that was doing their parts. And we found this great actress who happened to be deaf. And so we thought she would be great for the role. And we adjusted it slightly. So my director, Andy Hay, found her and worked with her and sort of reinterpreted the lines with her using sort of her sort of physical gestures. And yeah, it's sort of, we also wanted to make that, I don't want careful not to give too much away. We also wanted to make it matter that she did happen to be deaf. And in the sort of the climax of that story, there's a moment where um, the fact that she can lip read and is deaf is actually the making of the story and something that the story hinges on. And in some ways, it's kind of, in that moment, it's her sort of superpower in a way.
Yeah,
So it was kind of that's where the story came from. Um, and yeah, it's beautiful. It's a really beautiful moment, written really beautifully by Kareem Khan as well, one of our new writer on the show.
terrific. And that's all we're going to say about it because it is a very beautiful moment and you want to see it.
You definitely do. Episode 5.
You've been enjoying Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast where we talk about historical drama series and films as windows to the past and mirrors of the present.
Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters. Share this podcast. Join our historical drama community by signing up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content.
Now, back to our podcast conversation.
We now come to the question for our animal lovers in the audience. What is your process for writing scripts and stories that involves animals who may have lines or may not have lines?
You sort of, I mean, quite a lot of the animal stories we get from James Herriot, we base our stories on his anecdotes, and if not, we speak to his son, who's an advisor on the show, and he helps develop stories with us. and then you write it and hope the animals can do it. And we've got some brilliant animal handlers, Jill and Dean, who train the animals to do what we need them to do. And yeah, you hope for the best. You do have to sometimes amend things and change things, and there's some clever bits where you might think it's a dog lying down, but it's actually a prosthetic, and it's someone's arm working a prosthetic, which looks like a dog's neck, but it's not actually the dog itself. But yeah, it's a really sort of joined up group approach. There's a lot of people that put a lot of time and effort into getting those animal moments right. But yeah, it's you do just write and hope for the best, and then you amend afterwards. Is always my approach.
Have there ever been any? I was just going to ask, has there ever been a time when maybe the actor and the animal didn't quite click and you had to make a change in the casting
I'm
or the scene or
n-
whatever?
no, I think you always just got to get through it. And the actors themselves, they, I remember in the very first episode, Rachel had to sort of deal with a bull that wouldn't stay still. And in the episode, she grabs the rope and just pulls it along and ties it up. And that wasn't scripted at all. It was, but the bull kept walking away, and Rachel just took it upon herself on the third time to grab this sort of 2-ton bull and yank it and tie it up. And it was just, when I saw that on the rushes at the end of the day, which is the the tapes you get from what they filmed out on location, I was just like, oh great, we've definitely got our Helen here, because yeah, she just went and did it. Sam West is constantly trodden on by cows. That's his least favorite thing. But on the whole, they're pretty good. And you just got to find a way to get through it. Pigs are difficult. We had a pig, that Buttercup, that wouldn't move, so that was hard. But usually, food is the thing you use to get them to do what you need to do.
Well, same with our little dogs here.
Yeah.
Well,
Reward
now that
them.
you've asked that question, I'm curious, was there any disruption between, well, when Diana Rigg passed away? She played Mrs. Pumphrey, and now we have Patricia Hodge. But
Yeah,
we have the same Tricky Woo, right?
you
That's
do.
Derek.
Dude, Derek, who was cast. It could only be Derek. There was no one else that came close. Um, is Yeah. I mean, it was obviously so terribly sad um, to lose Diana like we did, but we kind of felt that this is a part that sort of transcends though the Diana was so wonderful as Mrs. Pumphrey, it is a part in a world that sort of transcends actors. It has a history of different actors playing the role, and so we felt comfortable recasting with Mrs. Pumphrey, but with Patricia Hodge as Mrs. Pumphrey. But and Patricia was very keen to, and we were very keen that it became her character rather than an imitation of what Diana was doing. I almost feel like they're two separate things in a way, and both wonderful in their own separate ways. But that we felt that was the best way to honour the work that Diana had done, while still being true to the novels that have this sort of much celebrated character in it.
So we were saying earlier that even though there's war, there's humor and there's also love happening in this community. And, many viewers, for them, marriage, two characters who are in love coming together as James and Helen marry is like the aspiration, it's the happy ending. But love is a little more complicated in the series All Creatures, Great and Small. So, can you talk to us a little bit about the role of love in developing the characters and the stories that we see in season three?
Yeah, I mean, love is very complicated. I kind of the idea that it's all sorted once you're married. I think anyone who's married would probably not recognise that. I think that it's there's always challenges, and we're all changing all the time. And I think we love in different ways, and love grows and changes. And it's really important to me that it felt real and that there is some grit and rough with the smooth. I think that that's always at the heart of our show, is that we want it to feel real and truthful. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have the harder times next to the good times, and the happiness and the sadness, and complicated and simple. And I think that we try to make sure that we approach all our characters in that way, particularly when we're telling a love story, which we're very aware of the tropes of what people see in with love stories. And you might expect that the series would be around building to the wedding, but we just kind of wanted to get on with the wedding, because life happens after that. That was the more interesting stuff for us, is when, how do they figure out their new family, their new relationship, especially with war coming up, and a sense of responsibility and duty tied into that. I think that particularly in this period where I think now people would expect, in the majority, I don't know, maybe that's not true across the globe, but it's certainly in Western society, people live together before they're married, so you understand what you're getting into a little bit more. Whereas in this society, in All Creatures Time, that's not the case. It's sort of they're married before they move in with each other. So they've not had a test run in a way. They're sort of thrown into this house with the madness of Siegfried and everyone else in Skeldale.
And it's also really cool seeing the kind of partnership that they develop over the series. So
Yeah, they're a great team, much like Nick and Rachel. They work so well together, and it was really nice to see Rachel in the house, Helen in the house,
yeah.
because so much, I think she'd missed out on all the breakfasts and all the studio fun. She was always out on location, so I think Rachel lived inside a big, massive coat for most of the shoot. But then finally in the studio, she could be in the nice warm inside and get the really nice breakfast they cook.
I I was thinking about what you said. The word simple just kind of popped out for me because I think, as I mentioned, over the past years during this pandemic, during lockdown, people really gravitated toward this, looking for something simple. But as we all know, things can get complicated in their simplicity. Um, but at the same time, people may see watching the English countryside as this idyllic kind of life. And even I got hooked on the series, the BBC series Escape to the Country. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm aware
Where
of it. I'm not an avid watcher, but yeah, I know it.
So we see people leaving the built up cities and suburbs for a change of life, a slower pace to get closer to nature, to have a community. And these moves were accelerating during the pandemic, as people were working remotely. In your experience with the series and just in life in general, how have you seen the English countryside and its communities change compared to the time that we're seeing in All Creatures Great and Small?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot more. Obviously, there's a lot more movement in terms of how the makeup of the countryside, their population. There's a lot of people moving from the cities to the country. There's a bit of a problem in this country with people owning second homes, where they have a home in a countryside spot that's particularly nice, and then it becomes very hard for local people to live there because their houses are taken up by people sort of having a second home. Whereas back at this stage, it was sort of, there's a moment in the first episode where Helen realizes that this is the furthest she's ever been from home, and it's not a long distance. It's like 50 miles, and it's a world that's a lot more insular. Whereas now, I think the countryside is a lot more sort of people from all over. You still get pockets, I think, where it does still feel very much like a community, but it's a different sort of community. I think it's a lot more found communities than um, it was necessarily there. But I suppose it's quite hard for me to say, having lived in the city for 20 years, to properly understand it. But yeah, that's my impression.
Do you have any um, inkling about moving to the country from the city at some point in life?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. I really enjoy being in cities. I like the idea of it, but I wonder if I would get there and then after sort of a couple of months go a bit stir crazy and need more people around me. But I don't know. Maybe I've just been conditioned by London. It's hard to tell.
There's always the market towns.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Well, we've had a nice conversation talking about all creatures great and small, but now we're at the part where we ask guests questions related to the podcast. This podcast looks at historical drama as a window into the past and a mirror of the present. So, if you could travel back in time, Ben, where would you visit and why?
I mean, dinosaurs, but just because I think they're really cool, and I'd love to see dinosaurs. I think that'd be ace. I know that's not particularly intelligent, but as as a kid growing up, I used to be kind of obsessed with dinosaurs. So yeah, to go and see them in the flesh when everything was massive and all the trees were massive, I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah,
What was
it's
your favorite dinosaur?
I actually like the Triceratops was my favorite.
ah,
I thought that was kind of wicked. The three horned. I just thought it was a bit badass. Um, so
yeah.
yeah,
I
that's where I would go.
the Brontosaurus was my favorite, and I used to engage them in dramas. I think
Yeah,
every kid has a dinosaur. Period. There's something
yeah,
about that.
absolutely. I think it's the time to go to.
Yeah.
Um,
Time capsules. What three items that represent the times you've lived through would you put in a time capsule?
Gosh, I mean, I think it'd be hard not to put a mobile phone in it, a smartphone, for what that's done to for all of us and to us all. Um, what else? Gosh, what would I put in there? Maybe like a sweep from my childhood, like a curly whirly, just because that's sort of vivid memories for me. Um, and yeah, what else? Maybe maybe a face mask actually at the moment. Probably a face mask.
From the past couple of years?
Yeah, it's kind of quite recent history, but I think it's left a bit of a mark and an impression of sort of how suddenly something that the world feels so in control and stable, and then in one moment everything changes, which it's kind of extraordinary to think about. The it's sort of a even war I don't think has ever been as experienced as globally as this before, where as that was, where everyone at the same time was sort of dealing with the same problem in pretty much every country in the across the globe, and which is just quite a incredible, mind blowing thing. And I don't know. I feel like the history hasn't been written on that yet, and um, it'll be interesting to see what the perspectives are looking back and what it does moving forwards, how it's changed us all slightly.
All Creatures Great and Small Season 3 can be seen Sunday nights on Masterpiece on PBS. Check your local listings. You can also stream the series on PBS Passport, the PBS Masterpiece Prime Video channel, and for free for 14 days from broadcast on pbs.org/masterpiece. We invite you to share this podcast of historical drama with the Boston Sisters with someone you know who would enjoy this conversation. Subscribe to Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters for more information and additional resources related to this conversation. Sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on future episodes and bonus content. You can write us at podcast@michonnebostongroup.com. Like and share Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters on your social media.
This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters, a podcast about historical films and series dramas. Visit our webpage at michonnebostongroup.com/Boston Sisters.
Tell us what historical dramas you're watching. Who knows? We may do a show about it. Sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the podcast, and share it with the people you know who binge on historical drama.
Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters is brought to you by the Michonne Boston Group. The views and opinions expressed on Historical Drama with the Boston Sisters are those of the speakers and do not represent the positions or views of the Michonne Boston Group, its clients, or affiliates. This is Michonne Boston.
And this is Tequina Boston. Thank you for listening.